everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Marketing Mondays with Marija. I am Marija, the host and also the founding marketer at Magier. And today I'm joined by Marija Hammon, marketing director at Relax Gaming, and also just an incredible marketer that I'm very lucky to be interviewing today. I am super excited that I get to ask her a few questions about hiring and scaling a marketing team. I'm sure this topic is extremely relevant to many of us marketers. So Marija, welcome. Let us start with your journey. I would say, can you walk us through the key steps in your career in marketing?
Of course. First and foremost, I wanted to thank you for inviting me onto your podcast as a guest. I've watched all your episodes, so it's great to finally be here. And yes, I'd be delighted to run you through my career path. So I have an educational background in marketing. I studied communications and psychology, and then moved on to a dual master's degree where I got Master of Arts in Integrated Marketing and also a Master of Science in Business Administration. From there, I landed my first job as a marketing executive that was on the entertainment business side. And then I moved into the agency world where I did brand strategy. And from there, I actually went into the FMCG world and handled hair care and beauty brands for a company in Malta. And that was incredible because I got to work with Procter and Gamble and also with Coty when they took over some of the brands I was managing. From that, I was headhunted into the iGaming space for a company called Catena Media, and I handled corporate brand management for them. And then my journey with Relax started, which is a company that I'm still with today. I initially joined the company to handle their branding and communications, and then moved on from there once the corporate brand was built and the new website was in place into a product marketing manager role where I then helped to bring that new corporate brand into all of our educational materials as well. And then from there, I became head of marketing and I started to lead the marketing team myself and then transitioned into my current role, which is marketing director.
Wow, Marija, your background is like incredibly impressive. I mean, we've already talked before briefly about it, and it's just insane how rich your career has been until now. And also, it's so rare to see, I think, people growing in their role or moving up, in the company. I think nowadays it's more common to, switch back and forth all the time. And I think it's, super impressive that you stayed and kind of persisted and grew so much to marketing director. Like, it's wow. What would you say are your biggest challenges right now in your role as marketing director?
I would say that it's probably the most common one, which is navigating change. I think anybody that's worked in marketing knows that it's very, very dynamic as a role. There are constantly a lot of moving parts. I also work in a very fast-paced industry as well and a complex business model too. So I would say that it's that. I know a lot of other marketing directors would probably say that things like budgeting and other aspects of managing and scaling teams would perhaps be challenging, but honestly, I love all of those aspects of my job. I actually love it all. So even the challenges, I don't really stumble on. I just make sure that I push through them and make the most of them.
Oh, that's amazing. I love the attitude and that you just, push through and learn and grow. And that is motivating you to, stay and do your best work, I guess. At this company as marketing director, you have grown your team, correct me if I'm wrong, from 4 people to 15 people across different offices, I believe in multiple countries as well, right? How did you structure the team to handle all of this growth internally?
So when I first joined Relax Gaming, we were a much smaller team than we are today, and the structure was quite simple. There was a head of marketing in place, and then a flat structure reporting into that role. And obviously, as the team grew, it was necessary to establish more trees and pillars within the marketing team that could support that growth. When people start off, in a smaller team, you have to wear a lot of different hats and do a lot of different things, and then your roles become and your remits become a little bit more concise as the team structure changes. So what we did over time was to try and put those pillars that I mentioned into place and give clear remits. So the first part that was handled was the design side. We have a pretty big design team in place now, but we actually put a creative director into the team and then built a structure underneath that. And again, over the years, that has also elaborated. We now also have a creative lead and then senior designers, junior designers, obviously, as people have also matured into their roles too. Then we created another pillar, which was a product marketing team. And at the time, there was events and merchandise, which sat separately, which we called general marketing, and then also the communications pillar. But we eventually combined the product marketing and events and merchandise into one pillar. That's just the general marketing pillar now. And we left the communications and design in place. So in today's structure, we have those three clear pillars and it's working beautifully. And like I said, we have now leads in place. Even I have somebody within my team who I promoted to marketing lead not too long ago. So it's just working very, very well with those clear remits and a solid structure.
Yeah.
It's just about understanding your team, understanding workflow, and also understanding what people are good at. So, of course, people who have stayed in a company for a while would like to experience growth. I think that's a big motivator for everybody. So, of course, becoming a manager and actually managing people is a big step and in many people's careers. So, yeah, it was just natural to elevate people into certain job positions. Other things were just necessities. Like I said, it was also about clarifying remits because as the team structure grows, you can't continue to have team-wide calls nonstop. You have to start having smaller, more focused goals as well. So not everybody is constantly in the loop on every little thing. So it's important to just have those clear remits and as little unnecessary overlap as possible. Of course, everybody continues to work together and make sure that we're all pushing to the same goals. But yes, you just avoid any unnecessary confusion.
What would you say has been your biggest, like managing such a huge team, what has been your biggest leadership lesson so far, would you say?
Definitely to trust your gut.
Oh,
That is the number one lesson, I would say. And the reason for that is because, of course, you hear a lot of advice. People all have opinions. And it's just very important to take that information that you get your way on board. But ultimately, you need to make decisions and you need to stand by them. So you want to make those decisions with integrity. And the way that you do that is by trusting your gut.
actually, one of the previous guests on the podcast, Alina Kowalczuk, she mentioned this also. Trusting your gut is super important because you are the marketer in the company. You know the company best.
Exactly.
No one else is equipped to make that decision, so you have to trust yourself. There is no other choice.
You do, especially as I said, because you need to then stand by your decisions. And it's also something that I have always pushed with my team too, in order to empower them. Because often, especially when you're in a more junior position or if you're just starting out in a company, sometimes you're not quite sure how to navigate office politics or difficult situations. And then you're not sure who should say yes to things or who to run things by. So I've always tried to encourage them to trust their gut as well, because at the end of the day, people are experts in their own area. And I always encourage my team to treat their area almost as their own business. And part of that is trusting their gut and knowing when to push back, when to push forward, and what the next step should be. So I think it's a really big one.
Would you say then that what makes a good leader is also, that they trust themselves? Are there any other qualities a good leader should have, in your opinion?
Absolutely. I mean, a good leader has to create a positive environment. People need to feel valued, they need to feel respected, and they need to feel motivated by that leadership. A leader has to have very, very strong integrity, as I mentioned. They also have to have a strong sense of empathy, in my opinion, and a clear vision is something which is imperative. Because if you're leading the team, they need to know what they are actually working towards. So you have to have that clear in your mind in order to be able to communicate it and push everyone in that same direction too. Ultimately, people want to feel supported and people want to feel inspired. So I think those are also two very, very big things. The managers that I really remember and the moments that I remember vividly are the ones where my manager stepped in and supported me, whether I asked for it or not. And I think that people value that a lot. And of course, like I said, inspiration. You want to look at the people who are ahead of you and be inspired by their journey and how you could potentially get to their shoes one day too.
That leads me also to hiring and actually
Mhm.
building those teams that you trust. What would you
Yes.
say are the red flags that you watch out for when interviewing potential new team members?
Very good question. I think that there can be a number of red flags, even as early as the CV stage. But when it comes to interviews, I would say that the biggest one for me personally is a negative attitude. So anybody that comes across not particularly enthusiastic about the role at hand, or perhaps puts a lot of blame onto other people in their previous company for things that happened or went wrong. So, yeah, I think you can always teach skills and you can teach processes and you can teach tools, but attitude is a little bit harder to shape. So, that would be the biggest red flag for me. And then, of course, there are other ones which are common red flags, I think, like very vague answers, maybe showing a little bit of insecurity or perhaps not full truth as well. Frequent job hopping, I would say a lot of people mention, and it can be a red flag. It doesn't have to be. I think that sometimes those moves can be justified, things don't work out and it's totally fine. But I think that if there is very, very, very frequent job hopping with no justification, then perhaps that could be a red flag for some. And unclear goals, a lot of focus on the financials, things like that. I mean, especially if it's coming up in the first conversation.
Yeah, I can see that. And you mentioned CV also that you noticed
Mhm.
already a few red flags in a CV. I'm sure many marketers looking for a job would love you to to comment on the CV part, what you look for,
Yes.
what you don't look for.
I think that everybody can be different. And of course, it depends on the job level and the particular role that they're applying for as well. But I think that for people who are still more junior, they need to realize that their inexperience can be a superpower and that they don't need to over embellish their CV. I think also a covering letter is always really good, or something a little bit creative if you want your application to stand out as well, and just structuring it properly and trying to keep it as concise as possible. Because when somebody is reviewing CVs, they're probably reviewing hundreds. So it's good to try and capture their attention as quickly as you can, kind of like on LinkedIn.
Would you say that if someone applies to a role and then, I don't know, they pass the first CV screening, is it a benefit if they have a LinkedIn presence, if they are active? Does it help you in your in a hiring process or not?
I personally think so. I mean, I'm a big fan of LinkedIn and personal branding. It's not something that I feel is a necessity. Again, it depends on the level of the role. If you're looking for somebody who's going to be public facing and perhaps media facing, then maybe that would be more of a consideration. But of course, if somebody sends us a link to their profile, it's great to see a little bit more about them. So I don't think that it harms in any way. Building your personal brand is always great. I'm a big advocate of that.
And when scaling a team, who, in your opinion, your experience, who would you hire first? Who should be the first hires?
I think that it's good for the first hires to be strategic and to be versatile. As I already mentioned, they would probably have to juggle quite a few things in their role. Of course, that happens later on as well, even as teams grow. But I think even more so when you are a small team, you just need to step into a lot of things that would perhaps not be outlined in detail in your initial job spec. So yes, I think breadth and depth really, just to be prepared to do that. Of course, a good strategist, somebody who understands branding very well, or a strong manager too. Those would be important roles as you build up a brand and all the messaging surrounding that. And then, of course, if you're not outsourcing your design work, then you need a very strong designer in place as well.
For sure. I think one of the challenges when teams scale and they hire the first, marketers, they expect them to do already so many things related to marketing, manage multiple channels, and then having them manage the design part as well, I think tends to be a bit unrealistic. In my experience. So moving on to the next question. How do you approach onboarding and how much time do you plan in for a new teammate to get up to speed with things?
I love a very solid and robust onboarding plan. That's just how
Ooh.
we do it in our team. So when somebody starts on day one, they already have their calendar pre-planned, and that includes time to do all of their general onboarding tasks on Bamboo, for example, and for our HR team, and also to do the mandatory training courses that we have on our LearnStir platform as well. And then all the team meetings. So from meeting your own team to meeting people in other departments, just so that they can try and get as much of a holistic perspective of the company, of the different departments, of the stakeholders that they'll be dealing with. And then after that initial week or two, then that's when we start more of kind of hand holding
Hmm.
onboarding into their actual role, but it would be very heavily supported for at least the first month. Of course, there's a learning curve, and I don't think anybody should be thrown into the deep end if you can avoid it. So that's just how we like to do things and how we tackle onboarding. And then when they feel ready, some people feel ready super quickly and they're like, no, no,
Hmm.
I don't need any more support. I am
Yeah.
going, I'm going to handle this completely independently, then that's great. But if they need more support, then of course we offer that support as long as they need it.
Oh, that sounds like an amazing experience. The onboarding at your company. Yeah, very structured. You give the person the time they need to adjust and to meet their colleagues. I think that's super important to feel like you're part of the company, part of the team. And that takes a bit of time, to feel comfortable, to also voice your ideas, do your work.
Of course. I mean, it takes time to get used to your team and who does what. And it also takes time to get to know the business model properly too. And we have a relatively complex one. And then, of course, all the tools and systems that are in place as well. So, yes, there's a learning curve for sure.
Amazing. And we already tackled this a little bit, but leadership, being in leadership can be very, very challenging. I think it's always very challenging. That can be. You're managing your own work, your own day-to-day work, plus you're leading people. You have all of these meetings. Do you have any advice for other people, other leaders, marketing leaders, for finding time to continue to do the strategic work, your day-to-day work, while also having to provide, lots of feedback, have hundreds of meetings, like you mentioned also briefly, and update all of the stakeholders. Like, I'm sure there is no like instant remedy to, find 20 more hours in a day, but maybe there are some tactics that you use that help you.
Absolutely. It can be insanely busy, and my calendar is often back to back with meetings. And then, of course, in between, you also have to provide all the feedback, as you said, and sign offs and everything else. And then there's the strategic work, which has to happen outside of that, too. So, what I started doing recently is actually time blocking. And I found that extremely helpful. So I block out time in my calendar, even for the tasks that I need to do myself, rather than just seeing my calendar as a place where people can book my time. I also now see it as a place where I can book my own time. So I think that mindset shift has really helped in that sense to manage more things within the workday rather than the workday just being calls only and then you having to deal with
Mhm.
the rest outside of that. So I think
Yeah.
that's a good mindset shift and a good tool.
How do you handle performance issues within your team?
I think that as a manager, you have to be ready to have tough conversations like that. Of course, there are times when some things fall behind, or perhaps things are not happening as expected. So you do need to tackle those conversations when they arise. But I think that it's important to tackle them with empathy and to not really just critique a situation, but to actually sit down with the person and to try and understand from their side as well what the potential blockers could be to them handling that task. Maybe there's something that you're not aware of, or maybe they are overwhelmed by
Mm-hmm.
something, or they misunderstood a part of the role or the task itself.
Yeah.
So I think it's that active listening and just really getting to the root of the problem and then actually trying to work together to create a solution and a plan, seeing it as an opportunity for growth rather than a criticism.
Related to that also, do you have any advice for maintaining motivation in the team during tough times? Like sometimes, very urgent launches or the metrics are down, so people are, maybe panicking a bit or they need to put in extra hours.
I think that with that, it's important again just to try and open up an environment for discussion where you could just talk freely about what's going on. Like you said, I mean, if it's metrics that are off or perhaps something that didn't go as planned either, and then just reframing those challenges again to opportunities and just focusing on growth and building resilience. So, a forward facing approach, really. And just reminding your team and maybe sometimes even
Mhm.
yourself that mistakes don't define you. I mean, of course, if it's something like insane, people would feel it and it would be a bit of a hiccup, but there's nothing that you can't overcome. And the team just has to take it as a learning and just find a way to either try to avoid that mistake in the future or to find a different path. I'm very open minded in that sense as well as a manager. And I've always encouraged even newcomers to the team to let us know if there's anything that they would do even completely differently. I mean, I want to hear about it. If there's a better way to do things, I am all for it. So I think that's always just an opportunity to revisit things and to really address what works, what
Mhm.
doesn't, and what could be changed.
When your team says, for example, or like voices that maybe they feel, I don't know, overworked, or they
Mm-hmm.
feel the company is not moving in the right direction, or if they feel like they're not supported enough, what can you do to make them feel better?
I think that it would really depend on what the root of all of that is. Like you said, I mean, there could be so many different factors really in that conversation. So again, it's just sitting down and having a real heart to heart conversation, being open and understanding. I mean, if it's a question of a feeling of stagnation and a lack of career progression, for example, then that's something that can definitely be tackled by putting a strong career plan in place, for example, that will motivate the employee so that even if they cannot receive a promotion that day or that month, they kind of know what they're working towards and what will happen in the future. I think that can be very motivating. If it's something that's happening on the personal front, then of course you can encourage them to maybe take some time off and to think if it's more that they don't feel aligned with the general company direction or something, then that's a slightly bigger issue, and perhaps they need to have a little heart to heart with themselves and see whether they still feel motivated in their own role. It really depends.
Finally, if you could go back in time 10 years, what would be the advice you would give to your younger self as a marketer? We already talked about, trusting your gut again, but
Yes.
just as a final word for our audience, maybe as well.
I think I would focus on inexperience being a superpower
Mm-hmm.
because it can be, especially when you're at the very start of your career. I think sometimes people actually overlook how much value they have to add at that point. And it would just be about being confident in yourself and knowing that you actually make your own luck in life. So just making sure that you own your mistakes, making sure that you own your narrative and that you own your path, and to never let anybody dull your sparkle.
Wow. Those are some amazing last words. Thank you so much, Marija.
My pleasure.
Don't let anyone disturb your shine spark.
Never.
Yes, never. Thank you so much. That was an amazing interview, and I'm so glad we got to chat about hiring, leadership, leading with empathy, leading with kindness. And
Of course.
thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's been so lovely chatting to you.